catching fish with horses. They would drag the nets out into the river with a boat and then connect them to horses like Clydesdales or Percherons. The nets would fill up with fish and the horses would drag them into the shallows. So Astoria used to have a pretty wild reputation. In fact, the Oregonian newspaper in about 1900 had an editorial that referred to Astoria as the most wicked place on earth. It had more bars per capita than any city in the United States. There were gambling parlors, opium dens, bordellos. If you see this little green two-story building on the left, the bottom floor of that at that time was a hardware store, and upstairs was a boarding house for women. Well, they had their own business going on, and so some of the men would go in there and they'd buy their hardware downstairs, and some of them would go upstairs and buy their software. But we've cleaned it up now. There's no more crime or corruption in Astoria at all. And if you believe that, I got a bridge to sell you coming up here. So this is, again, Bluey Beer on the right. Until about 6 years ago, this was a shellfish processing plant. They processed crab and shrimp, oysters, and then it was converted into a brewery. One of the more popular ones here in town. And then just past the brewery here, there's a kind of a flat space, this wooden flat space. There used to be about 20 businesses located here in a multi-story building, but in December of 2010, it caught fire and it all burned down. In fact, the world headquarters of Bumblebee Seafoods used to be located right here. So I mentioned the ferries that used to take people back and forth across the river at 14th Street. This boat here on your right that says for sale, that's the old Tourist 2. That was the last operating ferry on the river when it went out of business in August of 1966 when they opened the bridge to cars.
How much for the boat?
It's for sale now. It used to have a sign on there that said you wanted $225,000 for it, but he took that out. I don't know what kind of a bargain you could get on it now. But he brought that thing down from Seattle in the ocean, he and his girlfriend. It was a pretty wild ride having that thing out on the open sea. On the right is these white buildings. That's a fueling station, a commercial fueling station. It's primarily for the working boats on the river, the fishing boats, the pilot boats, the tugboats. When they need fuel, they can get that here. This gray building with the red door to the right, that's Fish Hawk Fisheries, a local fish processing plant. You can go in there and buy your own fish directly from them if you want. And this brick building on the right coming up, this is from the 1800s also. This was originally built as a bonded warehouse, and it's made of brick that goes clear to the river bottom. And that was to keep boats from pulling up underneath it at night, drilling through the wooden floors and stealing stuff out of the warehouse. It's now being converted into a vodka distillery, and we're all pretty excited about that thing opening up. And these condominiums to the right are called the Columbia House condominiums. They're the only waterfront condominiums or over-the-water condominiums in Astoria. They were completed in the early 1970s. Unfortunately, about the time they were finished, interest rates were almost 20%. And the guy couldn't hardly give them away. Ended up auctioning them off, some of them for less than $25,000. Today you can't even touch one for less than $350. So that would have been a good investment 40 years ago, 50 years ago. If we'd only known. So this rusted metal sculpture here on the right, that, believe it or not, is on the National Register of Historic Sites. That is an old ship spoiler out of a steamship that ran aground at the mouth of the river around 1900. The boiler was salvaged out of the steamship and put to work in the old White Star Van Camp salmon cannery that sat here until that cannery burned down in 1955, and now it just sits there and it's a condominium for birds. Now the guy that owns that old ferry back there, I can't remember his name. His first name's Christopher, but he lives on this boat here, this white old yacht, El Primera. That was built in the 1800s, and at one time was considered one of the finest yachts anywhere. And a number of famous people have stayed on that yacht. Babe Ruth stayed on that yacht. President Taft was on that yacht. A number of other people. He used to have a little sign out there that explained all the different famous people that served on that yacht, or that lived on it. He's got a fireplace in there, a clawfoot bathtub. It's pretty nicely appointed, and he and his girlfriend live on that boat. Now this little concrete structure to the right with the baby seagull on it, that was the soldering room in the old Elmore cannery that sat here. And they used to solder the tin cans together using an open flame. So to protect the rest of the wooden building that was covered with fish oil, they did that work inside a fireproof concrete box. And when the cannery burned down, the soldering room remained standing, functioning exactly the way it was designed to do, protected from fire. Again, we're passing through the warehouse here for Fort George Brewery. And I mentioned these tracks used to go all the way out to Fort Stevens, but some parts of it fell apart over the years. And this trestle was built just for the trolley. And since we are relatively over water, I need to inform you that in the unlikely event of a water landing, your flotation device will be the person seated next to you. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. That hardly ever happens. So you get a good look at the bridge right here. From the car deck down to the water is about 200 feet. It was built high enough to allow a U.S. aircraft carrier to pass underneath that bridge, which has happened a couple of times. And it was built to withstand hurricane force winds and a continuous current of up to 9 miles per hour. The current normally doesn't run that fast, although sometimes it runs fast enough. You'll see those buoys laying over on their side. So just past the bridge abutment here, we have a little display on the right. This is called Maritime Memorial Park, and this park is dedicated, going up here, it's dedicated to people who passed away, whose lives were given in service to the river or in the ocean or the canneries or the Coast Guard. And they have a couple of very nice ceremonies here every year as well. Yeah, right here. Yeah, thanks for riding. Good. So you see the broken arch there just past the flagpole. That's symbolic of when sailors drown at sea or in the water. That broken arch allows their spirits to rise to heaven, symbolically. On the right, you'll see a building that says Cannery Pier Hotel and Spa. That is the Cannery Pier Hotel and Spa. It's built on the site of the original Fishermen's Cooperative Cannery that operated from 1898 to 1948. It eventually went out of business and was torn down, and then a local businessman built that hotel to look just like the old cannery that sat there, right down to the fake smokestacks on the west end of the building. It's a boutique hotel, meaning it doesn't have a restaurant, but this red building here has the Bridgewater Bistro, a very nice restaurant here. I kind of plug it because my daughter works there. But this was the old warehouse and machine shop that serviced that cannery when it was in operation back in the early 1900s. We're going to stop right here.